Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to a complete and detailed Black Swan guide. Black Swan is the newest 5-star character released in version 2.0 of Honkai Star Rail, and in today's video, we're going to cover everything you need to know regarding her best builds, light cones, relics, teams, Eidolons, and much more. Black Swan is a character who specializes in damage over time, also known as dot or DOT damage, and synergizes well with existing nihility dot units. Before we begin, I want to give a special thanks to xxalanchangxx mains for their help with certain calcs and rankings in this video, and with all that said, let's get right into it. Alright, now starting things off, let's talk about what Black Swan actually does, covering her talents and traces. First of all, her passive talent is going to be a core part of her kit. Black Swan's passive talent gives you a chance to apply Arcana on enemies every time they receive dot or damage over time at the start of each turn. Enemies that are afflicted with Arcana will take wind dot damage, equivalent of 240% of Black Swan's attack at max talent level. Additionally, Arcana is stackable, and each stack you have will increase the dot damage multiplier by another 12%. You can get up to 50 stacks, and the way Arcana works is that it will stack up at the start of an enemy's turn when they take dot damage from any source. So for example, an enemy that has a bunch of shock on them from your Kafka will take all their shock damage first, and your Arcana will stack up from all of the dots that they take, and then your Arcana will deal its damage after all your other dots do theirs. Once that happens, your Arcana will deal damage based on how many stacks it has, and then your Arcana stack count will go back down to 1. Additionally, when you have 3 Arcana stacks on an opponent, it will deal wind dot damage to adjacent opponents while also having a chance to apply Arcana to those adjacent enemies. And if you have 7 or more Arcana stacks, your Arcana dot damage will ignore 20% of the target's and adjacent target's defense, which is really good, as defense ignore is always nice. What you need to understand about this ability is it's quite good for a dot in AoE situations, as provided you are stacking it, it will spread onto adjacent enemies, dealing good damage to all of them. It is also worth noting that the exact chance you have to apply your Arcana debuff at talent level 10 is a 65% base chance, but generally on Black Swan, you will be building enough effect hit rate to guarantee your Arcana application against most enemies. We'll see this when we talk about what stats to build on Black Swan, but thanks to one of her major traces, you will not only want to build effect hit rate to guarantee your Arcana and debuff application, but also because you will gain 60% of your effect hit rate as damage bonus up to a maximum of 72%, which you will get at 120% effect hit rate, but again, more on that later. Additionally, you get extra Arcana stacks through one of your major traces whenever an ally applies a dot to an enemy. This again will be 65% base chance. 1 stack of Arcana will immediately be applied as you enter battle, provided you have enough hit rate, and you can actually get up to 3 stacks of Arcana from 1 single attack. This will only come from your allies' dots, meaning that Black Swan inherently has a lot of synergy with other damage over time characters, which we'll cover in the team section. Also, while your Arcana can technically get up to 50 stacks, you usually won't stack it up as much, but you will typically be able to get a lot of Arcana stacks on your main target and then a decent amount on the adjacent ones, with the exact amount depending on how many dots you apply and how long the fight is. While your Arcana stacks will reset to 1 every time it deals damage, it will never get unapplied. It will always stay there on the enemies, stacking up until it deals damage and then going back to 1. Now for Black Swan's actual abilities, here's what you need to know. First of all, Black Swan's elemental skill will deal wind damage to a target and the 2 adjacent ones. While you do this, you will also have a even higher chance to apply an Arcana stack on all the enemies you're targeting, while also having the same chance to reduce their defense by over 20%. This defense shred lasts for 3 turns and is great as it will increase all of your team's damage. Additionally, when you use your skill, for each dot the enemy is afflicted by, either wind shear, bleed, burn, or shock respectively, each of these will give you a chance of inflicting 1 extra stack of Arcana. This is just one reason why Black Swan is so synergistic with running another dot character who will apply another type of dot onto them, like for example shock with Kafka, and then the wind shear that you're applying as Black Swan will for example give you 2 extra stacks of Arcana when you use your skill. For each different DOT, you'll get 1 extra stack, but you can actually fully stack this pretty easily inside of your ultimate, which we'll talk about very shortly. In fact, what your ultimate does is the following. First of all, when you use it, it'll inflict Epiphany on all enemies for 2 turns. What Epiphany does is make enemies take 25% more damage in their turn, which means that when your dots will deal damage, they will just do way more, as this is a vulnerability debuff during the enemy's own turn. Additionally, your Arcana on these enemies will be regarded as wind shear, bleed, burn, and shock all at the same time. This is great as it has synergy with your other passives, giving you 4 stacks of Arcana from just this bonus trace, on top of the other one you will get from your skill or normal attack, which we have yet to talk about. And lastly, for your ultimate, your Arcana stacks actually end up not resetting at the start when it does damage, with this non-resetting effect only happening once per ultimate. And on top of all that, you'll also deal a bonus amount of wind damage to all enemies when you use your ultimate. overall, this is a really valuable ult as it will make enemies take significantly more damage from basically every dot as soon as their turn starts, while also making your Arcana more powerful by letting it stack way faster and actually keep its stacks after proccing one time. Regarding your basic attack, while it's not as powerful as your skill, it can be viable to use as a way to gain a skill point while also having a chance to apply Arcana on the target you attack. Your basic attack will have this 65% base chance to apply Arcana to the enemy you attack, and then an additional stack, again, for each dot they have of either Wind Shear, Bleed, Burn, or Shock respectively. One stack for each, up to a maximum of 5 Arcana stacks from either your basic or your skill if the enemies you attack have all of these dots on them, which will be the case inside of your ultimate, and outside of it, you'll still typically get like 2 or 3 stacks per attack. For Black Swan, using your skill is important, especially to reduce the enemy's defense, as well as giving you AoE Arcana application and just more damage. With that in mind, because the Depth Shred lasts for long, it can be okay to weave in a basic attack here and there if you need a skill point. Black Swan's technique is a really strong one that will apply multiple stacks of Arcana to every enemy when you enter battle. In fact, you will have a 150 base chance to apply 1 stack of Arcana to each enemy, and then each time that you do, there will be another chance to apply another stack of Arcana, with each further stack having a 50% base chance of the last one. What this ends up meaning in practice is that with enough effect hit rate, you'll basically always get at least 2 Arcana stacks on every enemy, but it can be up to 4 or 5 depending on the resistance of enemies and your luck. This lets you enter battle with free Arcana stacks on every enemy, a really nice technique that I recommend using. Lastly, for your trace priority, obviously unlock your major traces, they're really good, but afterwards you should definitely focus on maximizing your talents level, as this will increase your Arcana's damage and also its base chance to be applied. So really your most important thing to level, but it's also worth leveling pretty much everything. Afterwards you will level both your skill and your ultimate pretty similarly, and you can also level your basic attack if you're using it, mostly to increase your base chance as well. It's also worth noting that you shouldn't neglect your minor traces, as wind damage, attack percent, and effect hit rate are all very useful. I do want to re-emphasize though that your talent is your leveling priority, because Arcana is the main part of your kit. Regarding how you're going to be playing Black Swan, typically you will be using your skill when you can to reduce the defense of enemies and apply Arcana to up to 3 targets, 1 and the 2 adjacent ones, but doing your basic attack for skill points is also pretty decent, as it will apply Arcana to a single enemy. Because of this, depending on your rotation, you may have to weave in 1 or 2 basic attacks here and there if you need skill points. Regarding your ultimate, it is a really strong ability, but its uptime is kind of wonky because it depends on the enemy's turn, and enemies can be really fast, they vary in speed, but as far as using it on Black Swan, you can typically expect to use your skill every 4 or 5 turns, 4 turns if you use 4 skills in a row and don't need to basic attack, or 5 turns if you're weaving in 1 or 2 basics, which oftentimes you will need to do to have enough skill points in your team. With that in mind, there are ways to ult sooner or faster, notably if you're running the tutorial Lycone or just running someone like Quoho who gives you a lot of energy. This can allow you to ult a turn sooner, like still getting a 4-turn ult without needing to spam your skill, or even a 3-turn ult if you use your skill 3 times in a row. With that in mind, as I said, the uptime can be wonky. Your ultimate is definitely really good, but because of many factors, and especially when paired with characters that'll buff your damage, or Kafka who will detonate your Arcana, building for your Black Swan's personal damage and not just only caring about your energy is typically going to be optimal, but obviously your ultimate's really good, so use it whenever you can. This does make her very synergistic with Ho-Ho though, and as far as synergies go, we'll cover this in the team section, but understand that running another dot character with Black Swan is usually the way to go because of how much synergy she has with other dot characters. This allows you to apply Arcana faster thanks to some of her bonus abilities, and also with a character like Kafka, for example, who is her best synergy by far. Well, not only will Kafka's damage be higher because of all of Black Swan's kit and her debuffs, but Kafka also is just the premier dot carry who has good damage and who will detonate the enemy's dots, synergizing very well with Arcana and just all of Black Swan's kit. And it is worth emphasizing that Black Swan's personal damage is genuinely quite high, especially in a proper team comp where you're giving her buffs, debuffing enemies, or even, again, using someone like Kafka to detonate and get more damage out of it. So building your Black Swan properly and investing in her personal damage as well is a very efficient thing to do. All right, now with that out of the way, let's get into how to actually build your Black Swan, starting with your best relic sets. First of all, the Prisoner of the Deep Confinement will be your best 4-piece relic to go for, generally speaking. This set is just amazing for dot characters as it gives you 12% attack on the 2-piece, and then it'll allow you to ignore 6% of the defense of enemies for each dot they have, stacking up to 3 times, ignoring 18% defense, and being really easy to stack in Black Swan's optimal teams. Because of this, you'll just get a lot of defense ignore and a lot of attack for free by using this 4-piece. It is also a pretty efficient domain to farm, as your other nihility character or damage over time, like DPS, such as Kafka or Sampo, would also want to run the set in the same team. Because of this set is your best in slot, and what I recommend recommend for your 4-piece relic set. Alternatives, if you don't have it though, include going for the quantum set that can also defense ignore, especially against quantum weak enemies, or if you're running someone to reduce the defense of opponents, a nihility support such as Silver Wolf or Pila, or just mix and matching 2-piece sets of attack and wind damage. Overall though, I highly recommend just farming the dot set, as it is going to be your best in slot. Next up, for your planar ornaments, here there's a lot of good options. I would say that first of all, the standard one is going to be Glamith. Now, while there are other options that can sometimes be a bit better, Glamith is not only really efficient to farm, but is consistently a great choice, as it gives you 12% attack and then either 12 or 18% more damage, provided you have either 135 or 160 speed, and even just at 135, it is already one of your best options. You're in fact either the second best or the best, depending on a lot of factors like your team and buffs that you're receiving. With that in mind, a set that can be situationally similar or better is the Pan Cosmic Enterprise set. Now, this set, I want to emphasize, is not very efficient to farm because it comes in a pretty bad simulated universe world. With that in mind, it does give you a lot of stats. You get 10% effect hit rate, which can be really nice, especially if you need more. And as we'll see in the very next section, Black Swan will typically need up to 120 effect hit rate. So getting an extra 10%, especially if you don't have enough from your stats and maybe aren't running a hit rate light cone, can actually be quite nice. On top of that, you will straight up just gain 25% attack for free, assuming you're building enough hit rate. Because of this and how many stats you're gaining here, this planar ornament set can either be your best or second best, once again depending on many factors, but being similar in strength to Glamith. Nice if you need the hit rate, but also more annoying and less recommended to farm. Because of this, if you have this option, then definitely feel free to use it, and it's great. But if you don't, then I do recommend farming Glamith for most people, because as I said, it is just a great option even at just 135 speed, giving you 12% damage and 12% attack, and being similar in strength to the Galactic Enterprise set, even just at 135 speed. Again, situationally better, situationally worse. Dot teams have a lot of variance, and also getting better if you do have up to 160 speed. Additionally, for sets like these, it's worth understanding that speed is a good stat to build on a character like Black Swan anyways, so it's not really like you're sacrificing anything to at least get this first 12% damage bonus. Lastly, another set that's pretty good in strength is the Space Stealing Station, that just gives you 24% attack, provided you have 120 speed. This will typically be your third best option, a very viable set if you have good substats on it and already have it farmed, but not quite as good as the other two. With that in mind, what stats are you looking for on your Black Swan? Well, as you know, to increase your dot damage, stats like attack, damage percent, and speed are great, whereas your dot's damage won't scale on things like crit rate or crit damage. With that in mind, you also want effect hit rate on Black Swan in particular. This is for a few reasons. First of all, you'll have a higher chance of applying your debuffs, and you can actually guarantee it. This is to stack up your Arcana, with a lot of your talents having a 65% base chance to apply the respective debuffs. In order to guarantee this and make it a actual 100% chance, you would want to look for 120% effect hit rate, which will always guarantee it, except against enemies with 40% effect res, which is mostly just some bosses, but you typically don't want to be building past 120 effect hit rate, as you lose out on a lot of value. In fact, a main reason why hit rate is also really good is because of your bonus trace that converts hit rate to damage. In fact, you will gain 60% of your hit rate as damage bonus, up to a maximum of 72%, which you will get and fully cap out at 120 effect hit rate, which also lines up with this 65 base chance on a lot of your kit. Because of this, you want to try to get 120 effect hit rate in order to guarantee your debuffs and maximize the damage conversion from your ability. With that in mind, even if you're a bit under 120, it should be fine. As you can see from the numbers on screen, you will still have a good chance of applying all of your debuffs, and you'll also still get a decent amount of damage bonus. So it's fine if you can't quite hit 120, but definitely aim for it. Try to get 120 without really going over, as it would mostly be wasted, except against some enemies with really high effect res. You can get some bonus sources of effect hit rate through your traces, a light cone, and even a main stat body, which can all make this number easier to achieve. In fact, here are the actual stats you're looking for on your pieces. Well, as we said, you want to make sure to get enough hit rate to be consistent. Because of this, you'll typically want effect hit rate on your body and also on your substats. The other stats you'll be looking for are attack percent and speed to increase the damage of your dots and make you go faster. In fact, regarding speed, it is typically good to build speed on Black Swan. Because of this, you'll be looking for it on your substats, and for your boots, you can either go for speed or attack percent. As far as your boots are concerned, I recommend going for speed boots for most players. Attack is definitely viable as well, especially if you have better substats, but in general, getting a good amount of speed is very important for a character like Black Swan to get more turns in and potentially outspeed your enemies. Having at least 134 or 135 speed with the Glamith set is a good goal, but getting even more than that can actually be optimal, although a lot of these speed versus attack comparisons will depend on a lot of factors, like the content you're doing, the enemies you're fighting, and the buffs you're receiving. Generally though, I recommend speed on your boots and in your substats, but attack percent is viable and strong as well. For your sphere, both attack percent and wind are viable, level and very similar in strength. With Ranmei or Lycons that give you damage percent or just damage buffs in general, an attack sphere can be slightly better though. Ranmei is going to be one of the best, if not the best support for Black Swan Kafka or just popular dot teams in general, which is why attack percent spheres, as I said, can be slightly better a lot of the time, but the difference between an attack percent and win sphere is very small, and so you could choose either of them, picking your best one based on your substats. And regarding your rope, usually attack percent is going to be what I recommend. There are situations where an energy regeneration one is viable, notably if it can let you get your ultimate a turn earlier, depending on how many basics and skills you're using, again, depending on your team. With the tutorial Lycon, for example, you can get your ultimate every 3 turns if you use 3 skills in a row without needing an ERR rope, but if you need to do a basic attack for a skill point, then you would need an ERR rope to actually get your ult every 3 turns. But even then, the question of how valuable your ult is variable, as sometimes attack percent can just be better for your damage, and even like your Kafka's damage will detonate your dots, but also being able to ult more often gives you more break damage, so there really is a lot to consider. Generally though, to keep it very simple, attack percent is the way to go for most people, although there are situations where ERR is a very viable choice, with attack percent being the general go-to. Alright, now moving on for the Lycons you want on Black Swan, it's relatively straightforward. In fact, I highly recommend going for a Lycon that has effect hit rate to make it a lot easier to build your Black Swan, because you want up to 120 effect hit rate, even if you have effect hit rate on your body and another 10% through your traces and maybe another 10% through the Pan-Galactic Planar set, you will still need almost 60 more effect hit rate if you want to hit 120. Because of this, it can be very difficult to get that much hit rate on your substats alongside attack percent and speed. And so it's typically just recommended to go for an effect hit rate Lycon to make things a lot easier. The first one I want to talk about, and your best slot, is going to be Black Swan's signature Lycon, Reforged Remembrance. This Lycon gives you 40% effect hit rate and then just a lot more damage. In fact, on top of the hit rate, you will gain profit stacks as you deal damage to enemies afflicted with wind shear, burn, shock, or bleed, which you will be doing in your optimal teams anyways. And then these stacks will increase your attack and have your dot ignore defense for a maximum of 20% attack and 28.8% defense ignore, which is a lot. This will be your best Lycon by far. This Lycon can be about a 30% DPS increase to your Black Swan, or around a 15 or so % damage increase to your overall team when you factor in your other characters' damage, like notably Kafka. Now, outside of your signature, what Lycons can you go for? While there are really good options for increasing your damage, first of all, let's talk about the effect hit rate options. The go-to and solid 4-star will be Eyes of the Prey for 40% hit rate and 48% increased dot at Superimposition level 5. This Lycon does get significantly better with Superimpositions, although it is still viable without them, as you'll get 20% hit rate and 24% increased dot, but obviously getting that 40% hit rate is just way better. With that in mind, for other options that give you hit rate, Silverwolf Signature is a pretty decent option that will also debuff an enemy, and as a free-to-play effect hit rate Lycon before the tutorial mission is a viable one that we got and fully superimposed through an event for free. This Lycon gives you 40 effect hit rate and also a lot of energy as you hit enemies. Now, the main thing I don't like about this Lycon is that it's typically going to be used on a very valuable support like Pila or Silverwolf, and so even if you have it, you may not have it available. With that in mind, the 40 effect hit rate is very nice, especially as a free-to-play option, because if not, as I said, getting hit rate on your relics is quite difficult. The energy you gain can actually be nice, allowing you to potentially get your ultimate up a turn sooner. And so this Lycon is definitely a solid option. It's not going to give you as much damage as some of the others, but the hit rate is really nice, and the energy can be more or less relevant to you depending on your rotation. Outside of that, there are actually options that can be better and that give you a lot of damage, but that will require you to have way more hit rate on your relics. This is something that is achievable if you're optimizing and building your Black Swan very well, have really good substats, but it can make building her a bit more difficult. But if you have enough effect hit rate or close to enough, then a damage Lycon can be viable, although it is difficult for me to recommend it because of how much EHR you actually need. Kafka's signature gives you a ton of damage and also some speed, so a great option. Herda's Nihility Lycon Solitary Healing also will give you a lot of dot damage, as well as some other stats like break effect and energy as well. And the new It's Showtime Lycon, the new free-to-play one you can get from the Memory of Chaos, also gives you a lot of damage and attack percent, being a great free-to-play stat stick, once again if you don't need more hit rate. Other options include Goodnight and Sleep Well for damage, Resolution for defense shred, or Wealth Lycon for damage, but do keep in mind that with this Lycon, the hit rate only applies to your skill. Overall, there are a lot of good options for Black Swan, and I want to make it clear that while personally I think going for a Lycon that gives you effect hit rate will make this character easier to build, if you have enough and don't need it, then a lot of the damage Lycons I mentioned are also very strong. With that in mind, here is a Lycon ranking for your Black Swan's personal damage, but please understand that this will vary heavily based on many factors, like what team you're running, your relics, your stats, and even a lot of other factors, as dot teams do have a lot of variance. variance. Factors such as who is breaking, how fast your characters and the enemies are, and everything else that I mentioned can greatly affect this Lycone ranking, so understand that the ranking may vary for you, but as you can see, there are a lot of really good options for every type of player. Regarding Black Swan's Eidolons, I want to mention that her E1 is really good. 7 Pillars of Wisdom will reduce the resistance of enemies by 25% of wind, physical, fire, or lightning if the enemies are afflicted with wind shear, bleed, burn, or shock respectively. Because of this, in any dot team with Black Swan, not only will you reduce their wind res by wind shearing with your Black Swan, which will not just increase your damage, but on top of that, if you're running another dot character, which you should be doing, their damage will also be increased by reducing the resistance of whatever element they are, whatever dot they apply. If you're running someone like Kafka who will shock, Sampo who will wind shear, or Luca who will bleed, or Guinea who will burn, their damage on top of your Black Swan's damage will be increased by reducing the resistance of the enemies you're fighting, and resistance shreds in this game are very valuable as a way to increase your damage on top of all the damage buffs and everything else that you have. Because of this, I think your E1 is a big damage increase, and while it can be a lesser damage increase for your personal Black Swan damage than her signature Lycone, it is bigger for your whole team, especially when paired with someone like Kafka. And so while I don't think you need any Eidolons, I do think E1 is really strong and better than her signature Lycone. Also, inside of your ult, your Arcana will be considered wind shear, bleed, burn, and shock, so you'll just shred all of these resistances very easily. Next up, for her other Eidolons, her second one will spread Arcana, giving 6 stacks to adjacent targets when you defeat an enemy who is afflicted with Arcana. E3 and 5 will increase your trace levels, 3 being your skill and talent, and 5 being your ultimate and basic attack. For your E4, Black Swan's ult will now decrease the enemy's effect resistance by 10%, and also giving her 8 energy when one of them is defeated or at the start of their turn. The effect res shred is nice, but it's kind of just okay for an E4. And lastly, her E6 will give you way more Arcana stacks. Whenever your allies attack an enemy, you will apply another stack of Arcana, provided you have enough hit rate, with a 65 base chance of this happening, like the rest of your kit. And anytime you inflict Arcana, there's a 50% fixed chance to just get an additional Arcana stack, basically making it to where anytime you'd apply an Arcana stack, it'll actually be 1.5, either 1 or 2 randomly. Now, this E6 is definitely solid to increasing her personal damage. How many Arcana stacks you can actually get? I will say that the most impressive Eidolon, in my opinion, is definitely the E1, an early stopping point and also a really strong one for your entire team's damage. But overall, she does not need any Eidolons and is a complete character at E0. Alright, now moving on, let's talk about Black Swan's best teams. This is going to be pretty straightforward, as Black Swan's teams follow a pretty straightforward structure. Generally, you want to be pairing Black Swan with at least one other dot or DOT character. Kafka is going to be the best, basically by far, for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, as not only is her personal damage good, but it will get greatly amplified by someone like Black Swan, who has really good synergy with Kafka, who applies shock and can detonate all the dots on an enemy through her skill. Kafka is pretty much the premier dot carry, and Black Swan complements her very well. Other options if you don't have Kafka include characters like Sampo, especially at E4, as he'll become quite a bit better, or alternatively Guinea or even Luca. Once you have these two characters though, a dot carry and Black Swan, your third slot will be a character that either buffs you or debuffs enemies, or alternatively a third dot character. In fact, the best option is typically going to be Ron May, as someone who just gives you a ton of damage bonuses, helps you break easier, and just is such an amazing support in general, who also can buff your entire team, not just one character. This is incredibly relevant because you're running two characters that are dealing a lot of damage, for example Kafka and Black Swan, so having a 5-star that can buff both of them is a really big deal. Alternatively, someone like Asta, a 4-star support, is actually a really strong option who can give you a lot of speed and attack percent, being really good at increasing your dot damage. Alternatively, a Nihility defense shredding support like Pila, who's my personal favorite, is another good option, giving you def shred and being very skill point efficient. Alternatively, you can also use Silverwolf for more single target buffs, but also a strong option. Other Harmony characters you can use include characters such as Hanya. Hanya can buff one character with speed and attack, helps with skill points, and increase the damage that an enemy takes, but this is only for basic skills and ults, so it's useful but not quite as valuable as the other supports I mentioned. For other options, Tingyu's okay, giving you a lot of attack and energy and damage, but only to one character of your two sort of carries, which isn't ideal. And regarding Bronya, I would mostly recommend running her in your other team instead, alongside your hyper carry, as while Bronya does give you damage and attack, she usually will cost a lot of skill points, unless you have a ton of speed on her, but generally you're also running speed on your dot characters, so it might not line up, and the crit buff is mostly wasted, so in general, I just think Bronya has more value in other teams with hyper carries, and not so much here, where I prefer the other options I mentioned. Overall, there's a lot of good options for this slot. I think the best 4-stars are Asta and Pila, and as a 5-star option, Ron May is definitely just the strongest. With that in mind, if you want to run another damage dealer, you can run another another dot carry, usually it won't be quite as optimal as a strong buffing support, but it can still be viable to run someone like Sampo, Guine Fen, or even Luca. Lastly, for your last slot, well, you want something to heal or shield you. The best healers are naturally going to be characters like Luocha or Huohuo. Huohuo I particularly like if you can manage your skill points, as not only will she give you a good amount of attack, but she also will give you a lot of energy. This can allow your Ranmei to ult one turn sooner, giving you more uptime, and also helping out the other characters in your team, like even Ranmei, giving you more uptime overall. I really just like Huohuo and just think she fits this team comp really well. Other good healers include Luocha, who's incredibly skill point efficient and can heal and cleanse you just through his passive. Fu Xuan is also broken as a preservation unit, tanking some damage for you, although her crit rate buff is a lot less useful in this team than in others. She will require you to use a skill point for her field, but just a great option. Another good preservation you can use is Japard, and for 4-star healers, Lynx is pretty good as a healer and cleanser, and if not, you could use Natasha. Be wary though that these healers will need more skill points to actually heal. There are a lot of healers you can go, and I think they're all great, so pick whichever one you have available, with my personal recommendations being generally Huohuo. I think she's probably the best here. The energy is so valuable, and the attack is also amazing, so that's my pick if you can manage your skill points, with Luocha being really comfortable and Fu Xuan and the others being good too. With that knowledge, you should know how to build a proper Black Swan team, with my personal favorite being this one, but there's also some decent 4-star options you can go with, any of the characters that I mentioned being very viable, so you can see what works for you depending on the characters you have and have built. I personally think that Kafka and Ranmei are huge upgrades, and honestly so is a 5-star like healer, but even without them, you can definitely make use of this character if you build a proper team. And so yeah, overall I am very happy with Black Swan as a dot character. I really enjoy her, have gotten a lot of value out of her alongside another dot carry, being genuinely really fun in pure fiction and simulated universe, but also clearing Memory of Chaos, even though the current matchup is quite difficult for her. With that in mind, I hope you enjoyed this guide. I hope it was helpful. If there's anything you want to add, it will be in a pinned comment, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.